Hello, welcome in episode 43 of the Raw Prospect Podcast. We are back. My co-host, Emmy Nixon. How are you?
I'm good, man. Good.
I'm your host today, Michael Ween. Today we have a great podcast for you. We're gonna go a little, off script. We're gonna talk some baseball, their return to play negotiations and where that stands currently, what we think about it. Then we're going to talk about the MLB World Series contenders for this year. If we do in fact get a season, we'll address that. But we want to start off with this. We talked a little bit last podcast about the NBA's return to play format discussion. And there were a lot of interesting formats in play. And if you haven't listened to that podcast, please go back and watch that. It is on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Very interesting discussion we had there. But I think we should start by addressing where things stand now with the vote for the actual format coming on Thursday. So in a report by ESPN's Adrian Wojnarowski, I can't say his last name.
Let's just say Woj.
Or Woj. Numerous members of the NBA's Board of Governors are in favor of a 22-team format that would include some regular season games and then a play-in tournament for teams outside the playoffs to compete for those last playoff spots. So it would be the 16 teams currently in the playoffs, along with 6 others. So it would be the Pelicans, the Trailblazers, the Spurs, and the Kings, who are all within, I think, 4 games of the last playoff spot in the West, as it stands now. And then I think the Suns would also get an opportunity, and the Wizards in the East would get an opportunity to play in for a playoff spot. Now, that's what's been reported. So, Emmy, real quick, before we move into our baseball discussion, I just want to get your opinion on this type format. A shortened, I guess, extended version of this regular season where they play some regular season games, and then the play-in tournament. What do you think of this and how it compares to some of the other formats that have been discussed?
Well, I think it's probably the best option in terms of getting the teams that still have a shot to make the playoffs a chance and being efficient enough to where not a lot of games are being played. But there is a part that I've been thinking of. I mean, are we really? I mean, it's good that we're giving them a chance, but none of these teams are going to be winning a championship anyway. So I feel like playing all these extra games might put the players in jeopardy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I would have to agree with you. I think it's the best format if they do in fact want to give teams currently on the outside looking in a chance for those last couple playoff spots. I do think it's the most efficient, the best way with the least amount of, I guess, drawbacks, if you will. But I think the league is adamant about playing, multiple exhibition or regular season games before entering the playoffs. Something that, if they did the group stage format, which I heavily advocated for in our last podcast, they'd just go straight into the playoffs and would play in that group stage for the first round. I think there is a benefit to that because I do think players need 1 or 2 weeks and a couple regular season games to get themselves back into actual playing shape, so they'll be geared up correctly for the playoffs. I do think players like that, and I do think that serves a benefit, which is a good thing about this format. And I think the play-in tournament would be a rating sensation, just like the group format would be, as I mentioned in our last episode. I think it would get good ratings. I think it'd be entertaining. But as you said, none of these teams are really going to actually contend, or at least we think, for a championship this year or any time in the near future. So is it really worth it to do this? I mean, I guess they're trying to test new formats, and I guess this would be the time to do that. But, I think based on what they want to do, this is the best format for them, regardless of what type of drawbacks you can come up with.
Right, and like the drawback that I mentioned, it's not really damning by any means.
Right.
I mean, and for me, just being a nerd NBA fan that I am, like, how often do we really get to see these teams on a national stage like this? We'll be able to see some young players that probably the national audience probably has not been able to see play,
And
Devin Booker,
right.
De'Aaron Fox, all those guys, Bradley Beal.
Right.
Probably not Bradley Beal.
And the only other drawback I can think of is if you're going to get all these Western Conference teams to play in for a playoff spot in a tournament, I'm sure in some respects that makes it kind of unfair to a team like Memphis, who might end up losing out on a playoff spot that they've played so hard and earned up to this point this season. That might serve as an unfair advantage to these teams who might steal that last playoff spot, from the Grizzlies, who to this point have way exceeded expectations and have, in my opinion, earned that 8th and final seed. That would be kind of the only other drawback I could think of. But
right. A lot of that team's success happened later in the season. Like, they were just starting to really get their engines revved up a little bit. I don't know if they'll be able to rekindle like the same momentum they had. So it'll just be really interesting.
Yeah, it will definitely be interesting. And as I've said repeatedly, it'll get massive ratings, which I'm sure the league will love.
But maybe they will find a way to give them a boost somehow, because they do have a 3-game lead over Portland, I believe.
Right.
So, I mean, that is a pretty significant gap. So they have to find a way to account for that, because that could count for something.
Yeah, I think, as we mentioned in the last podcast, any format that you choose is going to be unfair in some way, shape, or fashion. And I think, as I said, based on what they want to do, this is probably the best way to do it. But at the same time, you just have to deal with those drawbacks and just play the games that are in front of you. And whatever happens, happens. So I'm sure, I guess you guys don't know, but Emmy, I guess, is leaving on a vacation. What is it, tomorrow?
Tuesday night.
Tuesday night. So tomorrow night.
I'll be gone until Saturday.
Okay. So he will be gone. I will be coming back at you probably Friday sometime for another podcast, as the NBA should have voted by then on a return format, and we'll discuss that and more in an episode without him on probably Friday, maybe Saturday. We'll see. But I guess with that, we have to move on to what's going to take up the majority of this podcast, and that's our baseball discussion. And we'll start with the MLB's return to play negotiations and where that currently stands. So, Emmy, if you will, I think just tell us what you know about where things stand with the negotiations for the MLB's return to play this season.
Well, from everything that we talked about, before the podcast too.
Right.
It really is just a stalemate right now. It's just the players wanting some form or fashion of decent salary, and then the owners pushing back on that because of all the money they'll be losing with the less games. They don't want to sacrifice even more money. So they just have to find a way to meet in the middle. That just seems to be the only way we'll see baseball. But it doesn't seem like anybody wants to budge right now.
Yeah, I think before I get into, how the negotiations have been going and what formats have actually been proposed, this would be my message to Major League Baseball. And that is, don't drive these negotiations off a cliff. If they fail, if the MLB owners and the MLB Players Association, which are the two sides that are negotiating this deal or this format for a return to play, if they fail to come to an agreement, that's going to bear catastrophic consequences for not only the MLB, but baseball as a whole, now and in the future beyond this season. If they don't agree to terms in these, already very contentious negotiations, baseball is going to become a loathed presence in North America's sporting landscape. And that is very sad, considering that, for the first 100 years, or, 90 to 95 years of the 1900s, baseball was America. Baseball was was the identity. It was our national pastime. It was the centerpiece of sports in America. And now, since the World Series was canceled due to a players' strike in 1994, the MLB's reputation and their I guess how they are viewed in the public eye has never been the same. So they better find a way, whether it's the owners who have to sacrifice in some form or fashion, or the players who have to sacrifice in some form or fashion. They better find a way to get some type of deal done for a return to play this season, or else it's going to bear catastrophic consequences for baseball. And what I mean by saying that is, if you look at it from an owner's perspective, if they don't play, revenues are going to shrivel to basically zero. Nothing. There's going to be mass firings and layoffs, which would take place. There could be an opportunity for multiple bankruptcies. That's possible if they don't play. And franchise values would plummet, which is bad for the economics of the game. And if you look at it from a player perspective, first of all, they lose out on a season. And, they don't want to lose out on a season because careers are very short-lived in the big leagues. So they don't want to lose out on a season, on playing the game that they so passionately love. And, obviously, if they don't play, they don't get paid. They don't want that. And that's going to be catastrophic again to the economics of baseball. And this free agent market in 2020 and beyond, it would crash. And that's also not good for the economics of the game. So they have to find some middle ground, or else this is going to be catastrophic, and there's no other way around that for the game of baseball and the MLB, because the one area baseball has really shined in the past, 20 to 25 years is not on TV. It's not in terms of ratings. It's not on the field. It's in the economic part, the economic portion of this sport has been growing, actually, for the better part of the past 20 to 25 years. It was actually an $11 billion industry just last season. So if they don't figure this out, it's going to be terrible for baseball. And you pile this on with the cheating, with the huge cheating scandal that people have seemed to, I guess, forgotten about, and I guess for good reason, that, was the biggest story in the months of February and March before the season was getting ready to start. That's my message. Get this done, or else baseball is going to go into, it's going to be a disaster, and it's going to go into basically non-existence, if you will. It's going to be non-existent in the landscape of sports in America. So
right, and it's already not an Olympic sport anymore. So add that on top of everything, and it's just a recipe for disaster.
And
I think.
Go ahead.
Actually, my theory is that soccer will take over baseball's spot if they're not careful. I think soccer is really starting to grow here.
Well, I think I would probably have to agree with you, but I think that's a discussion we can have for another day. But
Right.
And we can get into the changes baseball actually needs to make in terms of their product on TV and on the field, if they want to continue, if they want to fix this whole situation and I guess grow to try and reach the levels of popularity of the NBA and the NFL, which is going to be really hard. But they could try to at least get somewhere in that stratosphere of the NBA and the NFL. But I just think in terms of the state of the game today, with the cheating scandal and this potentially catastrophic situation with not being able to play this season, it's going to be very, very bad. I don't think people understand how bad this could be. And this is a time right now with everything that's going on, and not only with the protests, which we'll acknowledge in the future. I think that's something that we have to acknowledge at a certain point in the future. And this global pandemic, America needs baseball. As much as you don't think it does, it needs baseball, especially in this time, these difficult and turbulent times in America and across the world. So it's not only going to be, bad for the game itself and the MLB, but it's going to be bad for the morale of America and beyond that. But I guess that's my little rant on, why they have to get something done, and that's my perspective. But Emmy mentioned a little bit, at the beginning of this discussion, right now, between the Players Association and the owners, it's basically just a stalemate. The original, in case you don't know, the original proposal from the owners' side was for a season restart, which would include an 82-game regular season schedule and a 50-50 revenue split between the owners and the players. Now, for those of you who don't know, the economics of baseball, which I've mentioned multiple times in this rant, it is very different. The economics of baseball is very different from that of the NFL, the NBA, and the NHL. And the main difference is the NFL, the NBA, and the NHL are all hard-capped leagues. They all have revenue sharing, meaning the players get a certain portion of the money, the coaches, the owners, it's all split based on a formula that they determine when they have the CBA negotiations. That's part of the CBA negotiations. Those are all hard-capped leagues. Now, the MLB, baseball, it operates with no salary cap. And there are two streams of revenue, national and local. The national revenue comes from TV deals for, national games that are televised on channels like Fox and ESPN, and postseason games. And they also get national revenue from merchandising and corporate sponsorships. And then local revenue comes from TV contracts and, in-game proceeds they get from each market gets from, game concessions, ticket sales, all that stuff. And so the sticking point here is that 50-50 revenue split the owners proposed, it's a non-starter for the Players Association. They weren't having it. They're having none of that. So they came back with a proposal just yesterday where they want 114 games from June 30th to October 31st, which would still be a significantly shortened season from the usual 162-game format, where they wouldn't have to take any additional pay cuts, and among provisions, they would have a right to opt out of playing this season if they have health concerns with the whole global pandemic with the coronavirus. Now, the owners, they don't really want to lose out on a whole ton of money here. So they want as short of a season as possible. So they don't, because they're losing money already. So they're planning to propose a counteroffer, which would consist of a 50 to 60 game season with players getting a full prorated share of their salaries, meaning they would get paid, say they play 60 games, they would get paid, I guess, what they would get paid for 60 games if it were a 162 game season. That would be their salary. And they get the full prorated share of that. So I guess if you look on the bright side, now they're kind of speaking, they're going back and forth trying to find a middle ground. But it's still kind of a stagnant negotiation here because the players want their money and the owners don't have it and they don't have enough. So they don't want to, they want the players to take pay cuts. And it's just a back and forth whole messy situation here. So in terms of, as I've said, in terms of the fans of the game, America itself, who, as I said, whether you like it or not, needs the sport to come back in some way, shape, or form. People just need to keep their fingers crossed that they can get a deal done, or else it's going to be disastrous for the game.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't really know a whole lot about baseball, but everything you said is completely right when it comes to, America's gonna need baseball to come back.
Right.
It's played a huge role in. I don't know how the best way to say this, but it's played a huge role in race.
Right.
Stuff.
Right.
I can't think of the right word, but with Jackie Robinson and everything that baseball has stood for, they led the way in a lot of ways.
Right.
So it's going to play a big part.
Yeah, it definitely, the game and the product itself that you watch on television, as it may not be very entertaining to some people or to the majority, at least of this younger generation and our generation, who mainly watch the NFL, college football, and the NBA. While it's not as exciting as that, what you do not realize is even though they're not packing stadiums, the smaller market teams aren't really packing ballparks in the regular season. Regardless, they still generate tons of revenue year to year, and it keeps on growing. You can go look at their revenue stream, and it keeps on going. Regardless of what you think of the the product they put out on the field, they're like a hub for money. I mean, baseball is a $1 billion industry. So, if it's going to be catastrophic for basically any way you look at it if they don't play. And that's the whole premise of this conversation. But with that, I mean, I guess if you don't have anything else to say, we are 25 minutes in here, so we can move on from that discussion. That was a very good discussion. I think we'll come back and readdress this at some point in the future once the MLB makes a decision on whether or not they are going to play and how that will occur. So, with that being said, as we hope, baseball returns in some way, shape, or form. If it does, let's talk about legitimate World Series contenders for 2020. Emmy, I want to start with you here. What do you know about who can contend for a World Series this season?
Well, it's really about 4 or 5 teams to me.
Okay.
The Yankees, the Dodgers, the Astros have an outside shot if they can overcome the whole, the whole not cheating thing. That's kind of a roadblock.
Right.
But and then the Twins, if they, I don't know. I don't really know about the Twins that much because they struggle against the Yankees in the playoffs.
Right.
But I'm interested to see what you think. I definitely the Dodgers too. That's a team I should have mentioned.
Well, I think if baseball does get a season, whether it's shortened or whatever, if they do play and they do get to a World Series and the world players don't go on strike or anything like they did in '94 and the World Series isn't canceled or whatever, or, it's not, the season isn't, I guess, stopped by any, concerns over the spread of the global pandemic, the world we've been living in now for 3+ months. If we get a season, I think a starting point for the MLB in terms of rebuilding their reputation, not that it's damaged all the way yet, but it is damaged, and it is damaged to a certain extent, as you mentioned with, the cheating scandal that involved both the Houston Astros and the Boston Red Sox. The way baseball is viewed is damaged to a certain extent. And I think one of the starting points they could end up, starting to rebuild their reputation, if you will, would be if we get a Los Angeles Dodgers, the favorite right now in the National League, for, another World Series appearance. If we get a matchup between the Dodgers and the New York Yankees in the World Series, that could be great for baseball. I know we've been talking a lot about the negative side here, but if we end up getting the two favorites, the Yankees in the American League and the Dodgers in the National League, that would get humongous ratings. Whether you like those teams or you hate those teams, whatever your opinion is, regardless of what you think, that would get massive TV ratings, and that would be massive for the MLB, not only in terms of rebuilding the reputation in the public eye, but in terms of, the economics. From an economic standpoint, that would get massive TV ratings, and that would help them get back some of this lost revenue that they've already lost here. So,
right, and I think if that matchup actually happens, I think that'll actually skew the public's view a little bit, and it'll actually make us forget about the cheating scandals.
Right.
You know? And maybe we'll get into, if that matchup actually happens, we'll actually get into more of the individual players,
Right.
rather than talking about all the cheating scandal and talk about, Clayton Kershaw and whether he can win, and, all the Yankees stars, Aaron Judge.
Yeah. I was about to get there. I just wanted to mention people would watch this because it would be littered with stars. When you're talking about a star-studded matchup, this would be the definition of that. You're talking about a Dodgers team that's made the World Series, I think in 2 of the past 3 years. You're talking about a team, a very good team that's made the World Series 2 of the past 3 years. They traded for 2 very, very good players. One of them is a top 5 player, and the other is going to be a very valuable piece to their starting rotation. We're talking about Mookie Betts, the 4-time All-Star for the Boston Red Sox, the 2018 AL MVP, a World Series champion with the Red Sox in 2018, a career batting average of 300, 470 RBIs, 139 home runs. I mean, the resume goes on and on. We're talking about him. The best outfielder in the MLB, regardless of position. Left field, center field, right field. He is the best. He is as good as it gets.
Like Trout?
Well, they're pretty close. Trout might be a little better, and thanks for bringing that up. I almost forgot about Trout. But, yeah, they're neck and neck. Trout...
Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, that's okay. I almost forgot about Trout. It's good that you interrupted me. You certainly can't forget about Trout. But the problem with Trout is he's on a team that doesn't really compete. He's been there for his whole career, and he doesn't really get the attention that Mookie Betts does. But the point is, you pair Mookie Betts, probably the second best outfielder in the MLB, with the third best outfielder in the MLB in Cody Bellinger, at least in most of people's opinions. Those two batting leadoff and cleanup, and you pair those with the guys like Max Muncy and Justin Turner and AJ Pollock and Corey Seager, who's also contended for a National League MVP. Their lineup is just loaded. And then you add David Price to a starting rotation that also has guys like Clayton Kershaw and, Gavin Lux, a young and upcoming prospect. We're talking about a very dangerous team with 2 of the, top 3 outfielders and hitters, pure hitters, in the game. That could be very dangerous. They have 2 MVPs in their outfield alone. So I think they should be considered the favorites. The reason I don't say the Yankees is because of all their injuries. And they've had the past couple years, they've been derailed by injuries. Aaron Hicks, Luis Severino to their starting rotation, James Paxton, all these guys. And Giancarlo Stanton, one of their big stars. He's, struggled staying on the field. Even Aaron Judge, he's struggled with different, shoulder and rib injuries, and he's still struggling, I think, to this point in the off season. But the scary part about the Yankees though is if they stay healthy, I think it might be just too much star power to overcome. You talk about adding arguably the best pitcher in baseball, like Garrett Cole, who they got from Houston, who put up a 35-10 win-loss record in Houston with a 2.6 ERA. For those of you who don't know, the lower the ERA, the better. But, a 0.962 whip, which is very good. The closer to zero it is, the better it is. So, the only reason I put the Dodgers over the Yankees is because the Yankees have preeminent concerns of injuries, and they have for the past couple of years. But I think the point that should be taken out of this discussion is if we get a Dodgers-Yankees World Series, that could help in the start of the process to, I guess, quote, curing baseball's reputation, close quote. That could help significantly.
Yeah.
Do you have anything you want to chime in here before I get to some other teams?
No, the Yankees are just they're just such a scary team with all the money that they just have no spending cap.
Right.
They just have so much money to blow. It's kind of scary, honestly.
It is. I mean, that's why they call them the evil empire. I mean, that's why, outside of New York and, some places in the Northeast, that's why the majority of baseball fans have, I guess, some form of dislikeness or hatred for the Yankees because they view it as unfair in certain respects that they have all this money and they spend it on all these stars and they've been so dominant for so many years. I guess that's the story in terms of, that's why they call them the evil empire per se. But it is what it is. Now, I want to get your opinion on the Astros here because I guess that would be the team you're the best versed in here. What do you think about not only, I guess you don't have to give your opinions on the whole cheating scandal if you don't want to, but what do you think about their chances to contend with the Yankees and the Dodgers?
Well, this may be a surprise to you, but I actually didn't know they lost Garrett Cole until just now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I didn't even know.
Wow. Okay, well, you learn as you learn things as you go here, I guess. So, but wow, that's a surprise. But keep going, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, they still have one of the best lineups in the league.
Right.
And I mean, the best part about their pitching to me was it wasn't their what's the name for it in baseball? Like the guys that they put in key games, like the pitchers that they put in key games. They're
aces.
Aces, yeah, that's the word. It wasn't just their aces; it was their pitching depth.
Right.
That was the biggest thing for me. So I think they're losing Cole hurt, but I feel like they'd still be, in pretty good position considering that the playoffs is going to be presumably expanded. So even more for them to get in and make a run.
I think they're definitely going to get in, and I think you make a great point. They still have a top three lineup in the league. I mean, Springer's still there, Bregman's still there, Altuve, who's a former MVP, is still there. Correa is still there at shortstop, one of the best in the game. And then they have guys like Yuli Gurriel and Michael Brantley, who have come up with timely hits time and time again in previous playoff runs. And, younger guys like Reddick, who have come on as of late. They still have one of the most dangerous lineups in the league. And even though they lost Cole, and I guess I've lost a little bit of respect for them for what went on in 2017. But, even though they lost Cole, Justin Verlander is still a top 5 pitcher in the league. He is aging, which is kind of a concern, but he's still, to what we've seen so far, he's still a top-notch starting pitcher in the league. An 8-time All-Star with World Series experience. He won He's a 2-time AL Cy Young Award winner, which is impressive. In his Houston Astros career, which now spans 3 seasons or 2.5 seasons, he's 42-15 with a 2.45 ERA, which is actually better than Garrett Cole's time in Houston. 633 strikeouts, which is more than Garrett Cole, and a better whip. So he's still a very, very good pitcher. And then you have Zach Greinke in the mix, who's also still, again, an aging pitcher, but still very good. The Astros are still very formidable. And hopefully Dusty Baker, who's the manager they hired in place of AJ Hinch, who was fired due to the cheating scandal, hopefully he can come in and change kind of the way the Astros are viewed now. Because they're part of this is the whole worry with the Astros this year is they have to now rebuild their reputation as not only a team but an organization. So that's going to be their biggest struggle this year. From a team perspective, they could still beat the Yankees. And, they have in the past. They kind of have the blueprint for it. Maybe the best for beating the Yankees in the MLB. But I think the biggest struggle is going to be rebuilding their reputation. I don't worry as much with competing for a World Series bid or a World Series championship.
Right. And also, the way that they were able to go into New York in that series, that was really telling to me about the character of that team. That team has a lot of experience, and that's huge in the play. That's huge in baseball in general because they can get hot at the right time. They know when to get hot. They know when to turn it up.
Right. Yeah, so. That's a really good point actually that you bring up there. In that New York series last season, the Yankees came in there and they stole game 1. That was huge for the Yankees at that point in time to go into Houston and get game 1 off a guy like I think it was Justin Verlander. I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and look. But it was one of the 2 aces, Verlander or Cole. They stole that game. And the Astros, given their character, they got game 2. It was very close and low scoring, but they got game 2. And they went into New York, the toughest place to play in the playoffs, with the fans and the whole environment and Yankee Stadium and all that, under the bright lights. They stole 2 out of 3 in New York before coming back to Houston in Game 6 and eventually hitting that walk-off homer to send them to the World Series. So, that walk-off homer by Altuve to send, off Aroldis Chapman, one of the best closers in baseball, to send the Astros to their second World Series in 3 years. So,
right, and it's just interesting that they still are getting wrote off,
Yeah. I think they're getting written off in the public eye for 2 reasons. And I think one is the obvious, the cheating scandal. Their reputation is now damaged to some extent. And they're going to have to, as I mentioned, start to kind of rebuild that. And I'm hoping Dusty Baker can do it because I actually I like the Astros, even though I can consider myself a fan of another team. I really like the Astros, and I was rooting for them in not only the 2017 World Series, but the last year's World Series when they eventually lost to Washington. But I was actually rooting for them. But then after that, the whole cheating scandal came out, and I lost a little bit of respect for them, as I've mentioned on Twitter a couple months ago. But yeah, I just think they're getting written off not only for that, but also because I think that's kind of, Garrett Cole left, and he's gone not only to any place in the league, but he's gone to, I guess, their interleague rivals, or the team that they're competing with most in the American League, in the New York Yankees. And he's gone to that powerhouse. So I think that's one of the reasons, the Yankees have gone stronger, and the Astros' reputation has dimmed to a certain extent. But you look on paper, it's still a very, very formidable roster. The only hope, or the only thing they have to overcome, is the struggles of this season, and hearing all the talk about what they did and how it's damaging and all that stuff. But, we'll see what happens.
Right. How are we looking on time?
We're about 45 minutes. I do have a couple more teams I want to discuss real quick, and then if you have anything to add, you can. Just real quick, I have two more teams. I'll go real quick. The Nationals, obviously, we have to mention them, from Washington, the defending world champions. I believe they have a top 3 starting rotation with Max Scherzer, a 79-39 win-loss record with the Nationals in 5 years with them, 2.74 ERA, 1,300-plus strikeouts. Steven Strasburg, another guy who's been in Washington his entire career, 10 years up to this point, a 112-58 win-loss record with a 3.17 ERA. And then they brought in just last year Patrick Corbin, one of the up-and-coming stars in terms of, I guess, pitching, starting pitchers go. From the Diamondbacks, they brought him in, and he did well in his first season. So I think they have 3 legitimate stars in terms of the starting rotation. They did lose their best hitter and Anthony Rendon, but they still have a couple up-and-coming hitters. We saw Juan Soto was a humongous part and had huge clutch time hits in those playoffs. They still have up-and-coming stars in their lineup. The only place I kind of worry is their bullpen. It's not as strong as some of these other teams, but, look what they did. All you have to do, really, is get hot at the right time, and that's what they did, and they still have a very formidable team to make a run at it. And then the final one is the Twins. Emmy mentioned earlier, they usually get screwed over by the Yankees in the playoffs, but they did add Josh Donaldson, third baseman from the Braves, one of the best in the game, to their already potent lineup. You're looking at a lineup that set the single-season home run record with 307 in the season last year. Jorge Polanco, Josh Donaldson, Nelson Cruz, Miguel Sano, Max Kepler. These are... They just hit home runs galore. The question, I think, with the Twins is, 1, can they overcome the Yankees and the Astros, which they haven't done to this point? And 2, is their starting rotation good enough? They have some good pieces there, but is it going to be good enough in the playoffs? Because that's really what it comes down to. Starting pitching and clutch and timely hitting. In the playoffs, the game kind of slows down as it does in other sports, and you're not able to just go out there and hit a ton of home runs. That's not, teams are playing their best pitchers. You're going up against the best of the best, and you're not just going to be able to go out there and bomb home runs like you do in the regular season. And we've seen it with the Astros and the Yankees the past couple years. The Yankees, in the regular season, they're great. They hit a bunch of home runs, more than the Astros, but when it comes time to get those big hits in the late innings of postseason games, it's Springer who comes up big with a double to right field, or Bregman who comes up huge with a triple or a stolen base, and Altuve who comes up huge with a clutch home run, or even Correa, with a stolen base or or a double play, turning a double play. They just have that clutch gene, I guess, if you will, where the Yankees, they kind of get in a rut sometimes in the playoffs because all these big hitters, all they know really how to do is hit home runs. And when the playoffs come, it's very difficult to do that. And that's why the Twins struggle. So those will be the obstacles that, they have to overcome. But I guess we'll stop there. I mean, it's the Dodgers and the Yankees at the top, the Astros right behind them, and then you have a bunch of teams that are still very legitimate, and in this year especially, could make a deep run and try for a World Series bid. The Nationals, the Twins. I didn't even mention the Braves, who have a ton of young prospects. I think they're a little too young, but you never know. And then you have teams like the A's and the Rays and up-and-coming smaller market teams that have built their teams off, pretty much nothing. So they've done a very good job. So I guess I'll stop there.
All right, but one thing I wanted to say earlier about the Astros, before we sign off here, it wasn't just the cheating scandal that made you lose respect for them. It was the way they handled the aftermath of it. It was like they were trying to, avoid talking about it. They were trying to move past it like it was nothing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's something that obviously was very true. I mean, the aftermath, made it all the much worse than it already was. But, we can have that discussion for another day. I think the main thing you guys as listeners need to take away from this is still very formidable on paper are the Astros, but they're gonna have some difficulties rebuilding their reputation internally inside the organization. That's going to be their biggest challenge. I'm hoping they can. I would like to continue to root for the Astros in the playoffs in some way, shape, or form because, they're in Texas. We live in Texas. We like to root for, our local teams. And, the Rangers have kind of been irrelevant. But, we like to root for the Astros. They have some very likable players. So we obviously hope that they're able to. But we'll just have to see. So with 52 minutes in, I think that's going to do it for this episode of the Raw Prospect Podcast. Please, if you will, leave a like, give a 5-star rating and review. Subscribe, do what you can. We greatly appreciate it. If you haven't already, as I mentioned earlier, go back and listen to our last podcast if you want to catch more NBA discussion, which we discussed a little bit at the beginning of this episode. Hopefully you guys learned a little bit, can take away some things from this. Obviously, I don't want to carry on, but our country, not only here in the state of Texas, but our country is dealing with some very difficult and turbulent times, not only with the coronavirus pandemic, but the protests against police brutality and racism that I by no means will ever stand for that. I'm sure Emmy himself has some very strong opinions that maybe we can get into in another podcast, but hopefully this can provide you a way to kind of get, tune all that stuff out, as important as it is, and just, sports is a way it brings people together, and hopefully we get these sports back so people can, in some way, shape, or form, spend a little time away from all that stuff and just have a way to bring all these people together. But with that, Emmy, if you don't have anything else to say, I think that's going to do it for this episode. Do you have anything else?
I just want to say, just bear with me with this baseball stuff. I'm just going to learn as I go. I'm trying to get
acclimated.
As knowledgeable as I can with it, but just bear with me. I'll get with it soon. I know Michael probably talked for most of this podcast, but I'll be on it soon. So
yeah, Emmy's still in. I've not that I follow baseball extensively or to the extent that I do the NFL or college football or the NBA or even college basketball, but I do follow it a little bit, and I did know some of this stuff previously from just kind of, I guess I was kind of that general fan. But, we'll come back to this in the future, and I'm sure Emmy will continue to learn and continue to get better. We'll have more basketball discussion. I'll be back later this week for another episode. So hopefully you guys will see you then. But with all that being said, have a good week and peace out.